farmed, and the borrower argues that it's a farm, now you have a minimum redemption period of 12 months. If you're foreclosing on land that's owned by a developer and it's 20 acres or more and any part of it's being farmed, there's no definition of farm in the statutes, and so there's that argument that I want a 12-month redemption period. So from my standpoint, if it's hard to get loans to do development, anything you can do to level that playing field would behoove the development community, and you should be asking your legislators to make a level playing field. Now, nobody wants to hurt the mom and pop farmer, and so my thought would be if there's a carve out for an owner-occupied farm, great, I don't have a problem with that. But it's nuts to say that a developer or a homeowner that has 20 acres or more and is doing a little bit of hobby farming gets treated differently than a regular homeowner. So that's my plea. And I don't know what people's reaction is to that, or if you've heard that issue before. I think I mentioned that to you, Scott, but other than that, I haven't lobbied anybody else.
Thanks for sharing, Ted.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
You just want to shorten that redemption period from 12 to 3?
Put it the same for everybody. Why should, in other words, define what a farm is, because clearly nobody wants to pick on the mom and pop farmer. That's not our goal. But yeah, we're foreclosing on a plot of land that's not owned by an owner-occupied farmer. Why should we have a 12-month redemption period?
My only caution to that is we rely very heavily on the ag use tax exemption. So when you define farm, we need to be a part of that definition.
No, I completely understand, and in banking regulation, we're used to the same word being defined 5 different ways in 5 different regulations, and oftentimes in a contradictory fashion. So I guess the lawyers don't have a problem with that, even though common sense says, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, no, I understand where you're coming. I'm just saying,
yeah.
The bits and pieces is, if that would kind of go further, there are bits and pieces that are protectionism for us.
We completely understand that, and that's not where I'm headed. So presumably you could craft legislation that would say, with respect to foreclosures only and not any other purposes under the law, we will define farm as being, and yada, yada, yada.
Can we go ahead and open it up to the audience for questions, please?
Just to tag on what John was saying, I think we really collectively need to use this period to dial back developer agreements. I think that they got way out of hand in the last cycle, and frankly, we were also anxious to get deals done that we probably signed on to things that we shouldn't have. I've seen some in Pleasant Prairie that are just, everything from repairs, and a lot of these ended up falling on banks, but I mean, they're tearing out, entire road base courses because there's a little alligator here and there, and I've heard of communities that are now talking about wanting developers to personally guarantee the improvements in addition to letters and credit and all the other things that we do. So, if we have a period now where they actually want to come to us, hopefully we can collectively as a group work with them and try to dial some of those things back so that we can lower our risk and be willing to move forward and do some reviews.
Great comment. Who's next?
When it comes to financing, new development, how do lenders view, aside from obviously wanting more equity with partners, et cetera, how do lenders view pre-sold property? So let's say it was a proposed 30-lot development and they had, half a dozen pre-sales contingent upon the subdivision being in place. How would, in general, how is that viewed?
It's a new concept, so I'd have to think about it for a minute, but it sounds like a good idea.
Well, I can tell you.
I mean, obviously we saw it at condos, but I've never heard of it on lots before until now.
No, pre-selling the lots. The developer says, okay, we've got 30 lots for sale. We're going to start marketing these and get contracts on them and disclosing fully to the buyer. Hey, listen, it's not here yet, but once it is in, that's your lot. That's your lot. That's your lot.
Makes a lot of sense.
I mean, those are equity people as well. Or are you going to say, okay, well, I'm going to look into every one of your buyers? Because my dad was developing a subdivision at one point, right when it was just hitting the skids, and he had 5 lots pre-sold, and they said, don't care, we don't know if those people are going to have jobs in 2 years. I mean, it was very at the peak of negativity. And so how was that viewed in your mind? And from a developer side, do you think that's a feasible marketing approach to it? I mean, can you market an unfinished product or an incomplete product?
Yep, okay. From my standpoint, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's something that we didn't see in any meaningful fashion historically, and, but it's clearly a nice, strong positive.
I can say that our development in Menominee Falls, it was a requirement. They needed 12 pre-sales before they would even consider
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I think,
forwarding the funds to us, so that was a unique situation that just happened to us over there in the falls.
So
I
they,
think something that,
pre-sale just an accepted offer, or what defines the
I
pre-sale?
had to have, well, you know, you can't close on the lot, right,
Right.
you know, so it was just a, sign off of the purchase, XYZ lots. Now, we were able to pick up some investor capital, you know, one guy buys 5 lots type of thing, but the bank's requirement was to have, it was like 12 or 15 of the first 35 lots, some sort of commitment, so that they felt comfortable enough, moving forward, even though they did know that, you know, it could be John Doe offer that could fall apart. I think they just felt that much more confident about pulling it together if they knew that there was at least gonna be something coming out of it, you know.
I can see where that would be
Read on it,
a
but
trend in your A areas, as Matt defined them, you know, in your prime areas.
I think
That
that's,
was common in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
thought.
it was common in the 90s. Almost every one of our projects had pre-sales. We would delay construction until we got certain more pre-sales. The bank didn't require it, but we
It's
used
just a
to,
matter of your
we
internal
used to,
policy.
we used to require it.
We've done it. We did it in Broken Hill. We
Right.
asked for $20,000 in hard cash, and if they walked away, they'd walk away from $20,000. And
That seems like that would be a
Held
strong
on to
selling
just
point
one.
to anyone who you're going financing for. You're looking for,
well, it's a good way to lower your risk. Feel a lot
Everybody's,
better
yeah.
as a developer.
It's
No one
nothing
can-
new.
even if
We've been doing it for a long
25% of those pre-sales fall apart, so what?
It's about the customer. The customer right now feels like they got you. And so the psychology's got to shift. The customer's got to believe that they have to do that to get a lot. And when that happens, then you can do that again.
And that's what I was saying, in the prime areas, I think that'll start to happen.
I think it's also between builders and developers too. I mean, I would imagine that a bank would look at, you know, if you have 6 offers, for example, from all individual John Does, where the bank hasn't done the underwriting on that client, versus having, let's say, 2 builders come in, each of which commit to 3 lots, and they put down some hard money, and maybe the bank has to look at that builder's information to make sure that they're legit and
And
everything.
they want to know they're
They're-
solid.
Yeah, I think that's what's gonna happen a lot more. I mean, just to give you an example, we've got a 57 lot project we're trying to entitle right now, and I say trying because it is trying. But as we go through that, we've gotta decide, are we gonna do 20 lots in phase 1? Are we gonna do 35 lots in phase 1? Or are we gonna be real crazy and do 57? Well, the only way I do 57 is if a whole bunch of builders come in and say, I'll commit to those 5, and I'll commit to those 5, and I'll commit to those, and then put hard dollars down like what John's talking about, because otherwise, there's no way we're gonna take that
Why
risk.
can't you market to consumers as well? You know,
You can-
We absolutely could. The problem is, I wouldn't, personally anyway, because the time frame is short, you know, I've got to decide in probably a 30-day window whether I'm going to do 40 lots or 20 lots, because it's got to be part of the developer's agreement, of course, and also part of my financing with my bank. So I'm going to have a shortened time frame. I don't know that I'd be able to get that many customers in quick enough to say, you need to commit, you need to put hard dollars down. I also think buyers are going to be a lot more hesitant to put 5 or 10 grand non-refundable down on a farm field than a builder who understands what a plat and grading plan is, and the fact that that's what it's going to look like 4 months from now.
back in the peak when everything was humming along and nobody could do anything wrong, I know some of my customers were going to municipalities to find out what's coming up, you know, because either didn't want to know or want what was in inventory right now, or just, I don't know, thought there was something better around the corner, but it just seems like that demand is you can kind of see it on the horizon again, you know, in the prime areas. I think you qualify it with that, but.
We found it hard to get the consumer to wanna wait that long.
That's the.
They might not have a
that's
choice
We
soon
even
enough.
did like, you know, started out with a refundable, you know what I mean, like, so if the subdivision, just to try to reassure them that the subdivision wasn't gonna come together, you're gonna get your 5, 10, or 15,000 bucks back. And,
But there are
I
some
think
people,
that
there are some
doesn't
people
sit
who are
there,
married to
so that
certain
makes me
school
feel like
districts,
a
certain
limbo.
markets still.
you know,
That
it's
way.
hard to say, well, we gotta wait 2 years, I got 2% interest rates, in 2 years it might be 5, I wanna wait 2 years, or you just run into
Not saying
some
it's
stumbling blocks there,
I'm
but.
saying it's possible.
If you did it
And I want
today,
to know
not
who's thought of it, that's all.
the risk you would take today is that there's still somewhat of an erosion of the land costs, land prices. So if you had a long enough timeline, you might put these things on hold at X price, and they may come back and say, no way, these lots are not worth that because so-and-so is still selling his for $20,000 over here. So they might try to negotiate after the fact, and then that 10% that Matt's talking about,
Well, you gotta get it
just
down.
flew right out the door.
Well,
So
what if you,
you're
what if
still
you give
doing
them,
a
what
huge
if you give
risk.
them 10,000 non-refundable or something? See?
If we can switch gears here,
Yeah,
you
sorry.
had a question?
It's, first of all, thanks for the panels to bringing all these great ideas here today. But I want to bring a point here that I think I noticed that in the market a few years ago. And it's the banking industry. If you're developing a lot more land and bringing more land to the market, how the banks see it and how the consumer out there can get qualified to get new construction loan in this market today where the values of houses went down. And when the bank look at it and say it's not a good investment for them to give that new construction loan. I don't see it yet on the market. The question, what's the adjustment that the bank do for the builders to give more new construction loan?
I didn't follow all of that question. Can you restate it with slightly different words? In other words, people are, the house is not appraising out, for example, or what's the challenge?
Well, the challenge is, yes, that's correct. The challenge is how you can appraise these houses when the value of the houses around went down. And you're producing more land to the market, and you want to build a new house on it. When somebody comes to you and asks you for a loan for new construction, can you appraise that, or can you approve that, then appraise based on appraisal coming today in the market?
Got it. And obviously there's multiple ways of doing appraisals, and typically they'll do at least two methods. One is comparable sales, and one is cost approach. And yeah, that's the problem right now, is typically the cost approach, and the true cost to build that house is more than the comparable sales. So unless they have a larger down payment, they can't build. And the banker in me says that's not good for the economy and the person who wants to buy, but it's not a logical loan to make. If they're going to spend more on the house than it's worth when it's done, you need to use the lesser value to lend against. And keep in mind, we're not looking for ways not to make loans. We want to make loans. We have cash sitting on our balance sheet. We want to get out there. We're being as creative as we can.
But why do you guys have such a hard time believing that our cost is our cost?
Well, no, we don't.
Why shouldn't the cost be that's it?
We believe your cost.
That is the appraisal.
We believe your cost, but we also believe the appraiser when he says, or when she says, that if we take this house back, it's going to sell for $50,000 less than cost. To use the classic example, we'll from time to time get somebody who wants to build a $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million home, not on water, somewhere, let's say in Waukesha County. They're welcome to do that, but we all know that after they build that house, it's not going to sell for that. If they turn around and put it on the market, it's going to sell for a lot less. They've overbuilt for that neighborhood. And so to pretend that the value is something different than what it is foolish. You know, so we'll lend on a really big house like that, but we'll lend on what we think it'll sell for and not what it was built for.
But I think that goes to our MLS discussion earlier. You can get more info out there. It's just gonna help.
On custom homes.
Yep.
That's the
Yeah,
big thing.
totally. One second, Ann.
Going a different direction, what are the thoughts, kind of twofold, on, from the municipal standpoint, on somehow getting higher densities to try and keep the lot cost down overall? But then on the flip side of that, for you as developers, is it truly going to be that much less in terms of the cost of that lot overall said and done?
Yes, we actually just went through that, Joe. In two different projects, we had conceptual plans for 100-foot wide lots. And this is something the builders need to know about from a product perspective too. And the numbers just flat out didn't work. These were both projects that were proposed back in the good old days, 05, 06, didn't go forward. So now we're sort of trying to reignite them and see if they'll work. Well, the reason if they didn't work in 06, they're not going to work today. So you got to change something. We went in and talked to the municipality. All we did is reduce the lot width by 10 feet down to 90 feet. Now in both of these two different communities, both situations, they weren't willing to reduce the side yard setbacks. So we had 15-foot side yards. So we went from a 70-foot building pad, 100-foot wide lot, down to a 60-foot wide building pad. And for me, I'm thinking, well, that kind of hurts the builder's opportunity for 3-car garages. But at the end of the day, builders are going to have to figure out how to design homes that are a little bit narrower, because the only way we can control our costs as developers is, number one, what we pay for the land, and number two, how many road feet of frontage there is per lot. That's really all we can do. So, and then the municipal fees are what they are. I mean, we can argue round and round about them, but you know, we got a site right now where we're paying more in assessments than we're paying for the land. So actually multiple times more. But, so those are the kinds of things, though, I definitely think that's gonna happen. Give you an example, outside of this market in Fitchburg, we're developing lots that are 60 feet wide, and that's because that's the maximum width they'll allow me to have. My minimum is 50, maximum is 60, with 3 foot to 5 foot side yards. So, yeah, and again, that's Dane County, I know that's different, but then you go to Mequon, and if you talk about a lot under an acre, which I know they're promoting, everyone's probably heard about Mequon and some of the good things they're doing, and John, I know you're on the planning commission there, so I won't bash it. It is good, it is really good promotionally to talk about it. There still is yet to be someone to come forward with a proposal at a half acre. And it will be really interesting, I said I was going to do it, I never actually got, when we were in that meeting, we had a project, it's a long story, didn't end up going forward with it, but the first person to go in there with half acre lots, I think is gonna get really slammed. From some people, there will be some support, but that's the kind of stuff that's gotta happen, because the only way to get lot costs down is to increase density. That's just the bottom line.
Are the municipalities receptive to that now?
The ones we've been working with, they've at least been reasonable. Pewaukee was one, honestly, and it's impressive because you have strong market areas, and I think, I could be wrong, but I think you modified yours a little bit.
Yeah, I
too,
was able to reduce mine too, by lot size and lot width, but again, the setback was the big thing. I fought with the building cap size.
You know,
We didn't want